have another platform game for you this week, but unlike Ratchet & Clank, this one has flown under the radar of most people. The game I'm referring to is Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, which may be a little rough around the edges, but is still a whole lot of fun to play today. It was first released in 2002 on the Xbox and the GameCube, as well as the PlayStation 2. Let's investigate why you should consider giving it a go. Whilst Ty the Tasmanian Tiger has a very basic and ridiculous plot, which is typical of the platform genre, evil cassowary tries to banish all of the warm-blooded creatures in Australia into a dream world by using 4 magical talismans, is thwarted by Ty's parents, who are sent through a portal. Cassowary comes back later to try again, and Ty steps up to stop him. That old chestnut. The characters are actually pretty good. One of the big benefits of setting a game in Australia is that it's such a unique country with wildlife that you won't find anywhere else on the planet, like platypi, koalas, kangaroos, and of course Tasmanian tigers. These are all represented in the game, with the likes of frill lizards and the big bad cassowary on the side of evil. I particularly like Mori, a sulphur-crested cockatoo that acts as your guide throughout the game. And Julius, a koala bear inventor who sounds like Sir Patrick Moore for some reason. It's a varied and colourful cast that does a lot to liven up proceedings and keeps you playing. Surprisingly, Ty is particularly strong in this category. The music, composed by a chap called George Stamatiadis, is amazing, with standout tracks belonging to the levels entitled Snow Worries and Outback Safari. Here, I'll shut up for a few seconds and let you listen to a little bit. It's great, isn't it? The music is backed up by some very strong voice acting, which, as you might well expect, features many Aussie voice actors. The script they were given is quite well written too. Mori is my favourite character, though I do have a soft spot for the baby koalas, who squeak phrases like "You Ripper" and "You're a legend, mate." The sound design is also pretty good, though also extremely similar to a certain game starring a bear and a bird on the N64. The little ditty that plays when you find one of the 5 hidden bilbies on each level will give you flashbacks if you played Banjo-Kazooie. Visually, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger holds up pretty well. There are some impressive draw distances, in particular on the stages set on the Great Barrier Reef, and the characters are well designed for the most part, except maybe for Ty himself, who wears a weird grin on his face constantly, which just looks a little bit off. The game also suffers from jaggies a fair bit, and definitely isn't as technically competent as the likes of Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper. Still, it won't make you gouge your eyes out with a spork in disgust, which is good. From a gameplay point of view, the Ty the Tasmanian Tiger is extremely derivative of similar games that have come before. I'll refer you once again to Banjo-Kazooie and also the first Jak and Daxter. You see, in order to reclaim the 4 lost talismans and defeat Boss Cass, Ty must explore 9 or so hub-like levels and recover up to 8 Thunder Eggs from each. The tasks involved vary from one level to the next, with the exception of 2 challenges per level, one that involves finding all 300 gems in a level, and another that requires you to track down 5 bilbies in cages. Adding to the amount of collectible stuff that you must find are golden cogs. There are 10 of these in every stage, some relatively out in the open, others hidden away. For every 15 of these you find, you can claim a boomerang upgrade from Julius, though I didn't find many of these upgrades particularly more useful than the boomerangs that you start with. You also get a new boomerang every time you clear a boss battle for collecting 17 Thunder Eggs from each batch of 3 stages. These ones do actually play a significant part in the gameplay. For instance, you can use the flamerang to burn down nasty spider webs that are blocking your path and melt ice blocks. and you can use the freezerang to create ice platforms on water, which can be handy for accessing certain gems. None of this is particularly challenging for experienced gamers, as the game was quite clearly aimed at children. That's not to say that adults won't have any fun with it though. It's quite a nice, relaxing, non-threatening game, and if you've already completed all the 3D platformers I've mentioned thus far in this review, it's a pretty decent alternative. I can't really say that this is Ty's strong suit, as the game quite clearly rips off a ton of stuff from its competitors. The use of the Australian setting is quite nice though. You don't see too many games being based there. KO the Kangaroo comes to mind, but not much else at the moment. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger is really the sort of game that you'd blitz through once, have a fun time and not look back at all. As I said, the game doesn't put up much of a challenge and can be 100% completed in about 10 hours or so. Copies are pretty easy to find and mine was just £3, so if you spot it for a similar price it's definitely worth picking up. I'm glad I chose to play Ty the Tasmanian Tiger as part of this year's Summer Backlog Challenge. I used to love 3D platformers of this type, and they don't come along too often these days, with Yooka-Laylee being the exception. Sadly, the Ty series is just a tad too obscure to get an HD Trilogy update, but you should try them out on one of the consoles they were released for back in the day. Probably the most entertaining thing to come out of Australia since Barry Humphries.